our church, we have a ministry called JAC, Justice, Advocacy, and Compassion. And compassion tends to be the first response of the church. We see somebody suffering, we want to help. So we start to provide some kind of relief. If a person's hungry, for instance, if they need clothes or shelter, we start to provide that. But over time, that compassion should move us to the point where we begin to speak for those who don't have a voice. We speak up for those who can't speak for themselves. A great example is in the Bible, in the story of Esther, where the Jews were being slaughtered. She became their voice to the emperor, where she said, "These are my people, and this is what's happening to them." So that's moving from compassion ministries into advocacy. But eventually, as we're pulling people out of a river, they just keep getting thrown in this river, we keep pulling them out, and we're resuscitating them, we're caring for them. We eventually have to ask ourselves the question, well, how do they keep getting dumped in here? Somebody's pushing them in. And we go further upstream and we find out who's pushing them in. And that's when we move even beyond advocacy into justice. And so once again, in the book of Esther, the answer was, let's change the law.
Wow.
So she spoke out, but the response ultimately was, let's change the law so that these Jews can now defend themselves. And let's empower them and give them the resources they need to stand up against injustice. So the church, at least in our context, doesn't do a very good job with that. And part of that, I think, is we come from a culture that's very individualistic. And as long as you read the Bible with these individualistic glasses, whenever you see suffering, you'll respond to that suffering on a personal level. And there's some things they're not private problems, they're public problems. And we continue to respond to public problems with a private solution, those problems just keep going. So what we're being trained to do in this Passing the Mantle program is to do civic engagement, where when we find a problem like a person being homeless or hungry, we start asking ourselves the question, what is the underlying cause? And we just keep going down, down, down until you get to the root cause of this problem. And an example in our setting in Los Angeles was the riots that took place many years ago. And there was one incident that just sparked everybody rioting. But the more they started analyzing that, they said, well, yeah, it was this one incident, but these kinds of incidents happen all the time. And part of the reason is because these people are crammed into this small location where the housing is far too dense, there aren't enough services in terms of banks and grocery stores and all of this, people don't have adequate transportation, et cetera, et cetera. So that was kind of the why. We just keep asking why? Well, they kept asking why, and they eventually got down to, well, why are they all living in this isolated place? Why don't they move out? There's surrounding areas. And the more they began to investigate, they found out that all of these surrounding properties had land covenants going back decades where these properties could not be sold to a black person. And that's the reason why everybody was isolated. So there was a legal, systemic cause of all of the suffering that had happened. So that's kind of an example of what we mean by determining what the root cause is. But then once we know the root cause, then we have to engage in this civic engagement of figuring out who's in charge. Is this a city council problem? Is it a state problem? Is it a federal government problem? And go to the person in power and confront them with the need for change.